Hello, and welcome to the Logistics Management Podcast Series. My name is Jeff Berman. I'm Group News Editor for Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group. Today, it's a real pleasure to welcome Dr. Alfredo Coutino to our podcast. Dr. Coutino is a director at Moody's Analytics, where he is responsible for analysis, modeling, and forecasting for Latin America. Based in Moody's Westchester, Pennsylvania office, Dr. Coutino is in charge of real-time coverage of Latin America for economy.com. He has been a regular presenter at Moody's annual Macroeconomic Outlook Conference and has also been a speaker at United Nations conferences as well as the American Economic Association. He has also published papers on applied econometrics with Nobel laureate Lawrence Klein. Dr. Coutino received his PhD in economics from the University of Madrid after completing doctoral studies at Temple University. Alfredo, welcome to the podcast.
It is a pleasure to be with you, Jeff.
Yeah, we really appreciate having you come on today. And just to set the table for our audience, Alfredo, because the key theme of our conversation today will be centered around nearshoring in North America, benefits and inconveniences. Just as a little bit of background for our audience, the proliferation of a more restrictive tariff policies, along with emerging geopolitical events, is producing somewhat of a reconfiguration of global supply chains with the relocation of plants and investments to countries with geographical advantages and more market-friendly environments. This relocation process, also known as nearshoring or friendshoring, is already happening within North America and is greatly benefiting the area thanks to the many advantages provided by the trilateral trade agreement among the United States, Mexico, and Canada, also more commonly known as USMCA. What's more, Mexico is quickly becoming the main destination of nearshoring in North America. Another thing is that nearshoring is certainly producing benefits, but at the same time also generating inconveniences as it attracts producers from other regions to Mexico with the purpose of accessing the U.S. market. Specifically, Asian producers subject to higher U.S. tariffs and restrictions, something we'll get into in this conversation. This is triggering concerns in the United States about the possibility of triangulation of China's imports into the United States via Mexico. So, Alfredo, let's jump in. How do you see, or what do you view as the main factors behind nearshoring?
Yes, thank you, Jeff. Let me just start to say, in addition to what you already mentioned, that nearshoring, it's a process that is not new. It has existed since years ago, but we were not familiar with the term nearshoring, for example.
Sure.
The previous North American free trade agreement between Mexico, US, and Canada that was signed and put in place in 1994, it was a collaboration between the three countries in terms of enhancing and promoting economic development in the North America region. It was a kind of nearshoring because it put the three countries together to collaborate and to enhance economic links in the region. So now we are knowing that there is this more popular term, which is nearshoring, but it's not new. And as you mentioned, Jeff, nearshoring is just the process of relocation production plants from one country to a country which is closer to one important market in the global economy. In this case, when we talk about North America, we are talking about Mexico. And Mexico, because of its geographical advantage to the largest country, the largest market in the world, the US, it has that advantages, but it's not new. However, what we can say now is that there are at least three factors behind this new popularity of nearshoring. The first one is the disruption caused by the pandemic in 2020. actually the outbreak of the COVID-19 at the beginning of 2020 produced a paralyzation of production processes and distribution, disruption of transportation, because every country in the world was affected by the pandemic. So it was a disruption in supply chains. Now, the second factor is the tariff war, particularly between the US and China, that initiated with the arrival to power of President Donald Trump in 2017. Since that moment, and based on his philosophy or approach of bringing jobs back to the US, it started to impose restriction to trade with China, some other countries from Asia, and also including Mexico. So this kind of protectionist policy was also an important factor triggering nearshoring. And the
Okay.
third factor is something that it has happened more recently, which are the geopolitical events. For example, the military conflict between Russia and Ukraine, it also disrupted the transportation of many products from the primary sector, particularly energy, fuel, and oil derivatives, but also agricultural products that were produced by either Russia or Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
And then we have another conflict, the frictions between China and Taiwan, and more recently, Israel and Hamas. All these geopolitical factors also explain to some extent the popularity of nearshoring at present.
Okay. All right. Terrific. Now, specifically regarding Mexico, Alfredo, why, in your opinion, is Mexico an ideal destination for the relocation of global players or companies?
I would mention at least three elements explaining why Mexico is becoming so attractive for the global players. The first one is the geographical advantage of Mexico with respect to the largest market in the world, the US.
Yes.
So it's
Yes.
just across the border, it's just around the corner. And also, we have to remember that Mexico has the membership of the US, Canada, Mexico trade agreement that, as I
Yes.
mentioned before, it was put in place in 1994 and it was reinforced and it was re-implemented in 2020. So this membership in the largest trade agreement in the world gives Mexico a preferential trade treatment, meaning that Mexico doesn't have to pay the same tariffs to export goods to the US
Mm-hmm.
like any other country in the world. So Mexico has a special treatment being part and member of the US, Canada, and Mexico trade agreement. And
Okay.
another factor why Mexico is a good destination for this nearshoring is that being a country just across the border, just around the corner, it produces a significant reduction of production costs, not only in terms of transportation, because the cost of transportation bringing, for example, avocados from Mexico to the US is cheaper than bringing avocados from Peru or from Africa. So that is an important stimulus for the US to keep Mexico as a partner and also seeing Mexico as a good destination of US investments in that country.
Okay. Terrific. And then when we look at the benefits of nearshoring for the parties involved, uh, what do could you talk about some of those key things? I imagine there's more than a few.
Yes, absolutely. The spirit of the trade agreements in the world. not only the North American trade agreement, is and was at the time strengthening the collaboration, the economic integration, and also to put supply chains in a particular place that it can ensure the supply of inputs and final products in different markets in the world. So the main point about the benefits of nearshoring is that the countries that are involved in this relocation process have the benefits of economic integration and also the collaboration in terms of supply chains. Now, a second part of these benefits is that, for example, in the case of Mexico, Mexico is the recipient of all these new production plans, of all these flows of foreign investments. So that enhance the Mexican capacity to produce, which consequently increases the trade between Mexico and the US.
Okay.
Now, an additional factor is that because Mexico received all these new investments from the US and from other countries, it is also the recipient of new technology. And new technology is important to increase productivity and consequently to increase the economy's capacity to produce. Now, an additional factor to this is that when we put new technology, new flows of investment, more export, more production capacity, in the end, the economy is highly benefited because economic growth is higher and is more sustainable. But also all these new plans and investments helps Mexico to create more employment and to improve wages. So these are basically the main benefits for the case of Mexico as a recipient of nearshoring.
Okay, great. So we've talked a lot about the benefits and the advantages of nearshoring. What about the other end in terms of the inconveniences, perhaps, of nearshoring for involved parties?
Yes, definitely. This is an important part and an important point, Jeff, because yes, it is true. And basically, everybody talks about the potential, the benefits, the positive about nearshoring, particularly for the case of Mexico. But these benefits also have a side part, which is the inconveniences that can produce. One of them, and particularly seeing the inconveniences from the side of the US, which is the country promoting the nearshoring to Mexico, is that when Mexico attracts the arrival of new investment and production plants to the Mexican territory, this is not an attraction for US companies, but also from companies from the rest of the world, and particularly from Asian countries. So this could create an inconvenience for the US government because Mexico is a member of the trilateral trade agreement in North America. So when Mexico is attracting production plants from Asian countries, particularly from China, which is a competitor of the US, that creates an inconvenience for the US. That's one part. Second part is this attraction, this relocation of plants from Asian countries to Mexico also has a purpose. Since China's products do not have preferential treatment by the US, so now there is a strategy from China saying, well, if my products sent to the US are going to pay higher tariff, well, it would be a good idea to open a production plant in Mexico, produce in Mexico, and then send my products from Mexico to the US using the preferential treatment that Mexican products have in the trilateral trade agreement. which is not going to be good for the US. And actually, this has triggered some frictions in trade relations between the US and Mexico. We already know the claims from the US government asking Mexico to clarify the percentage of imports from other countries that are in the products that Mexico is exporting to the US. And the last part, which I do consider the most important part, is that there is the possibility of triangulation of Chinese imports using Mexico as the back door to send products to the US.
Okay.
There is also a claim from the US government about that, and the potential of this issue to damage the trade relations and international relations between Mexico and the US exists. And I do believe this is one of the most important parts that Mexico should take care of.
Okay. Understood. Really great insight there. Just a few other quick questions I thought of, Alfredo. Um, when we look at the state of things and at the pace at which things are moving as it relates to nearshoring, specifically within Mexico, if things were to stay at the current pace, where do you see things perhaps over the next 3 to 5 years? What type of environment might we be in or examining?
Well, first of all, it is important to remember that Mexico already had presidential elections
Yes.
last weekend. And the winner of this election, it is the candidate that ensures the continuity of the current administration. And the current administration, it's basically run by a president that self-defined himself as a leftist uh, political leader. And he has implemented some measures against market competition. And some of national investors and international investors were not happy with this kind of policies.
Okay.
Now, the president-elect has said that her administration is going to be a continuation of this economic model. So one of the issues that could arise from this economic model continuation is that frictions between the US and Mexico will continue to stay there. And Mexico will have to make extra efforts to really create the business climate and really ensure that is creating the possibilities for US companies to really stay in the country. We have to remember that the US is the main provider of foreign direct investment to Mexico. If the US is not happy with how Mexico is conducting the business climate, well, that is going to be a negative factor for Mexico and actually to get the benefits or the full benefits of nearshoring for the country. I think this is an important part, important point that Mexico needs to pay attention.
Okay. Got it. Yeah, that is for certain. And just one more quick one before we wrap up, Alfredo, and I should have asked this earlier. Um, Obviously, automotive manufacturing in Mexico is huge. It's rampant. And you had mentioned produce as well. What are some other verticals, some other sectors that are currently most prominent when we think of nearshoring, when we think of U.S., Mexico, back and forth, and you had mentioned China, the sectors where they may start to establish themselves in China. What are some of the other industries that people should be mindful of that perhaps aren't as dialed in to the whole concept of nearshoring or friendshoring that they should be aware of?
Yeah, absolutely. The most important is automotive, definitely, which is part of the manufacturing sector. And in here, it is important to remember that 90% of Mexico's total exports come from the manufacturing sector, the domestic manufacturing sector. 75% of Mexico's exports to the US come from the manufacturing sector.
Okay.
So the key point to remark here is that the manufacturing sector is a key sector for Mexico to develop, to create the conditions, the business conditions to attract foreign direct investment. And as you say, just other than the automotive sector in manufacturing, we also have global companies interested in opening manufacturing plants in Mexico,
Okay.
in the electricity sector, in solar energy, in textiles, in machinery and equipment, and also, of course, in the oil industry, in refining and producing oil derivatives. So inside the manufacturing sector, we do have key sectors that are highly attractive to foreign investors. But if we go outside the manufacturing sector, we can also see agriculture. And we know that Chinese companies are investing heavily, not only in Mexico in the agricultural sector, but also in other Latin American countries. Mining, for example. We know that for the US and Asian countries, lithium, copper, and other minerals are of high demand for them to produce. And they are sending companies to Latin American countries and to Mexico to invest in mining, agriculture, and also in manufacturing sectors.
Okay. Yeah, so it's a pretty wide net to say the least. So listen, Alfredo, we've reached the end of our allotted time for today's podcast. So on behalf of Logistics Management Magazine and also the Peerless Media Supply Chain Group, I'd like to offer up a big thank you for spending some time with us today.
It is a pleasure to have these comments and to share my points of view about nearshoring in North America. Yes, it is really a pleasure.
No, absolutely. And we'd love to have you back again down the road. For those of you who would like to connect with Dr. Alfredo Coutino on LinkedIn, he has a LinkedIn profile, and the last name is spelled Coutino, so pretty easy to find. And he's even easier to find on Twitter, and that's simply at Alfredo Coutino. And also, please feel free to look for us on Twitter at Logistics Management. It's simply at Logistics MGMT. And if you're not subscribing to our podcast already, please do so wherever you find your podcast. Just go dial up Supply Chain 24/7, and you should be able to find it and add your name to the subscription. So thanks, everybody. Have a great day, and we'll catch you next time.